back to the Economic Sutra. Can you believe it's already episode 10? Time really flies when you're having fun exploring the economic wisdom of ancient India.
It really does, especially when we're uncovering those insights that are as relevant now as they were all those centuries ago.
Absolutely. But before we get into all of that, I do want to take a second and give a shout out to the awesome team at Audiocast Lab India.
Oh, they're fantastic.
They really are. They're the ones working their magic behind the scenes to make this all possible. And let me tell you, they do an absolutely incredible job.
Their expertise in all things podcasting is really something else. From scripting and recording to editing and distribution, top notch, I tell you.
Yeah, they're the best. So if any of you listeners out there have ever thought about starting a podcast of your own Audiocast Lab, India is definitely the place to go. They'll guide you every step of the way. You can find all their contact info in the show notes.
Definitely check them out.
All right. So, are you ready to explore a topic that might seem a little dry at first glance? But trust me, it's anything but.
I am. Lay it on me.
Today we're tackling property rights in ancient India.
Oh, property rights.
Yeah. It might not sound like the most thrilling topic, but it's actually a fascinating window into how societies function and how they create wealth and how they maintain order.
It's so fundamental, you're right. And what's really interesting is that ancient Indians had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of property rights. And in some ways, it was even more balanced than some of our modern systems.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. What made their approach so unique?
Well, for starters, they didn't just have one category of land ownership like we tend to think of today. They actually recognized three distinct types: private, community, and state-owned land.
Three types. So it wasn't just about individuals owning land.
Not at all. They understood that different types of land served different purposes and required different approaches to ownership and management.
Okay.
Private land was, of course, what we're most familiar with today. You know, individuals or families owning land for their homes and farms and businesses.
Makes sense. It's the foundation of individual economic freedom in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
What about this community ownership? What did that look like?
Well, think of things like shared pastures or forests or water resources. These weren't owned by any one individual, but were managed by the community for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah.
It was a way of recognizing that certain resources are essential for the collective well-being and need to be protected and used responsibly.
That's a really interesting concept, especially in today's world where we're facing so many challenges related to shared resources. Like water scarcity and deforestation. It's like they were already thinking about sustainability centuries ago.
Precisely. And it highlights the fact that individual rights and community well-being aren't always in opposition. They can actually complement each other.
Right.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How can we learn from these ancient principles to better manage our shared resources today?
It certainly does. Now, what about that third category you mentioned? State-owned land. I have to admit, when I hear that, I kind of think of kings just taking whatever land they wanted. Was that the case in ancient India?
Not quite. While the state did own land, there were specific rules and limitations in place.
Oh.
It's more like the government owning land today for things like parks or government buildings. And even when the state needed to acquire private land, they didn't just seize it arbitrarily.
So they had a system for that, like what we call eminent domain today.
They called it eminent domain too, and they had very clear guidelines for when and how it could be used. It wasn't just a free-for-all for the king.
I'm curious, what were those guidelines? How did they make sure this power wasn't abused?
Well, first and foremost, the land had to be acquired for a genuine public purpose.
Okay.
Like building roads, irrigation systems, or fortifications, projects that benefited the entire community.
So there had to be a clear public benefit. That makes sense.
Well, equally important was the concept of just compensation. If the state took your land, they were obligated to provide you with something in return, either another piece of land or monetary compensation.
Oh, interesting. It wasn't just a matter of them taking your property without any recourse.
No, not at all. And there was another layer of accountability, too. Kings weren't just free to make these decisions on their own. They had advisors, councils, and even legal experts who would weigh in on these matters.
So there were checks and balances even back then.
Absolutely. They understood that concentrating too much power in one person's hands could lead to abuse. The system was designed to ensure fairness and prevent the arbitrary exercise of power.
All this talk of ancient legal systems is fascinating.
Yeah.
How did they actually keep track of all this land ownership? Do they have like some ancient version of a land registry?
You're closer than you think. They did indeed have systems for recording land ownership, which might seem surprising considering how long ago this was. They also had laws governing inheritance, ensuring the smooth transfer of property from one generation to the next.
So it wasn't just a chaotic free-for-all. They had rules and regulations and systems in place to manage land ownership effectively.
Exactly. And all of this points to a sophisticated understanding of property rights and their importance for both individual prosperity and the overall well-being of society.
This is mind-blowing. I had no idea that ancient India had such a well-developed system for managing property. It's making me rethink everything I thought I knew about ancient economics.
That's the beauty of exploring these ancient texts. They're full of surprises and insights that challenge our assumptions and offer valuable lessons for how we can approach challenges in our own time.
Speaking of valuable lessons, this is probably a good time to remind our listeners that if you're enjoying this exploration of ancient Indian economics, we have links to all the books we're referencing in the show notes. You can find those down below if you'd like to do some exploring of your own.
Definitely. There's a whole world of knowledge waiting to be discovered in these texts.
Now, going back to what we were discussing, I'm curious to know, why should we care about any of this today? I mean, it's all very interesting from a historical perspective, but what's the relevance to our lives in the 21st century?
That's a great question, and the answer is more relevant than you might think. The principles behind these ancient systems of property rights have a direct impact on our lives even today. They shape how our economies function and how we interact with each other and the world around us.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how these ancient ideas connect to our modern world.
Well, think about it. Secure property rights are the foundation of a thriving economy. When people know they have a right to own and use property, they're more likely to invest in it, improve it, and make it productive. This applies to everything from farmers cultivating their land to entrepreneurs starting businesses.
So you're saying that a strong system of property rights encourages people to be more productive because they know they can reap the rewards of their efforts.
Exactly. And when people are more productive, the entire economy benefits. It leads to greater wealth creation, innovation, and ultimately a higher standard of living for everyone.
That makes sense. But it wasn't just about individuals, right? We talked about community ownership as well. How does that fit into the picture?
That's a crucial point. Ancient Indians recognized that certain resources are too important to be left solely to individual ownership.
Right.
Things like forests, water sources, and common grazing lands needed to be managed for the collective good.
So it's about finding a balance between individual rights and the needs of the community.
Precisely. They understood that a healthy society requires both individual initiative and a sense of shared responsibility.
It seems like they were really ahead of their time in recognizing the importance of sustainable resource management.
They were, and their approach offers valuable lessons for us today as we face challenges like climate change and dwindling natural resources.
Wow. I never thought a discussion about property rights in ancient India could lead to such profound insights about our modern world.
It's a testament to the enduring wisdom of these ancient texts and the timeless relevance of the questions they grapple with. It really is fascinating. The more we dig into these ancient texts, the more we realize how much they understood about human nature and economics and that delicate balance you need for a thriving society.
I totally agree. It really makes you think, are there other parallels that we can draw between their approach to property rights and the challenges that we face today?
Absolutely. One area where their insights are particularly relevant is in urban planning and development.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it. Ancient Indian cities, they were meticulously planned, often with a strong emphasis on public spaces and efficient infrastructure and, a clear delineation of different zones for residential and commercial and civic purposes.
So it wasn't just about dividing up land for individual ownership. They had a much broader vision, considering the overall functionality and well-being of the entire community.
Yeah. Precisely. They understood that cities weren't just collections of buildings. They were living organisms that needed to be carefully designed to promote harmony and prosperity and a sense of shared identity.
That's a really powerful way to think about urban planning. It's not just about maximizing profits or individual gain, right? It's about creating spaces that foster a sense of community and enhance the quality of life for everyone.
Exactly. And it's interesting to consider how their approach to property rights might inform our thinking about some of the most pressing challenges we face today, like, affordable housing or equitable access to essential services.
That's a really intriguing thought. Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah.
How might their ideas help contribute to solving these modern problems?
Well, let's take affordable housing, for example. In ancient India, they recognized that ensuring access to shelter wasn't just a matter of individual responsibility,
Uh-huh.
it was a societal imperative.
Okay.
They had systems in place to provide housing for the less fortunate, whether through, charitable institutions or government-sponsored initiatives.
So they had a sense of social responsibility when it came to housing. They weren't just leaving it entirely to the forces of the market.
Exactly. They understood that a stable and prosperous society requires a certain level of basic well-being for all its members, including access to shelter.
That's a really powerful concept. It challenges the notion that providing housing for those in need is somehow a burden on society. Instead, it's like you said, it reframes it as an investment in the overall health and stability of the community.
Precisely. And this same principle can be applied to other essential services, too.
Okay.
Think about access to clean water and sanitation or healthcare. Ancient Indians understood that these weren't just luxuries for the wealthy. They were fundamental necessities that contributed to the well-being of the entire population.
It's kind of amazing to think how far ahead of their time they were in recognizing the importance of these things. And it really does make you wonder, what can we learn from their approach to address similar challenges in our own societies?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Their wisdom reminds us that we need to think beyond short-term solutions and individual gain. We need to consider the long-term well-being of our communities and invest in systems that promote equity and sustainability and a shared sense of prosperity.
These are really powerful insights,
Hmm?
and they definitely give us a lot to think about. And for those of you listening who are eager to explore these concepts further, I do want to remind you that all the books that we're referencing in today's episode are linked down in the show notes.
Definitely check those out.
Now, as we wrap up our exploration of property rights in ancient India, I'm curious, what is one key takeaway that you would want our listeners to really carry with them?
I think the most important lesson is that property rights aren't just about legal frameworks and economic transactions. They're really about how we choose to organize ourselves as a society
Okay.
and how we create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about creating a society where everyone feels a sense of belonging and has a stake in the collective well-being.
Exactly. And that's something we can all strive for, no matter where we live or what challenges we face.
This has been a really enlightening conversation. I'm so grateful for your insights today. Now, before we move on to our next topic, which is just as exciting, are you ready to set sail on the high seas of ancient Indian trade?
Absolutely. I'm eager to explore how they connected with the wider world and left their mark on those global trade routes.
Well, then get ready to embark on a journey that's going to take us from the bustling ports of ancient India to the far corners of the ancient world. Welcome back to the Economic Sutra. It's amazing what we can learn from ancient India, even when it comes to something as, well, seemingly mundane as property rights.
It's true. Their approach to land ownership and management offers so many insights, and they're just as relevant today as they were centuries ago.
Absolutely. And now as we get ready to set sail on our next adventure, exploring the world of ancient Indian trade, I want to remind our listeners that if you are enjoying these explorations of ancient Indian economics, we have links to all the books that we're referencing in the show notes. So if you'd like to dive even deeper into this fascinating world of ancient Indian thought, be sure to check those out.
Those texts really are a treasure trove of wisdom and insight.
They really are. Now, before we wrap up this episode, I want to turn our attention to you, our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring all the complexities of property rights in ancient India. But what are your takeaways? What stood out to you as particularly interesting or relevant to the world today?
I'd love to hear your thoughts, too. What resonated with you the most? Was it the concept of community ownership, the emphasis on just compensation, or maybe the sophisticated systems they had in place to manage land and prevent abuses of power?
Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below, or reach out to us on social media. We really do love hearing from all of our listeners and engaging in these fascinating discussions.
Your perspectives always enrich our understanding and help us connect these ancient ideas to the challenges and opportunities we have today.
And on that note, I want to thank you, our amazing listeners, for joining us on this journey through the economic wisdom of ancient India. We're so grateful for your continued support and your enthusiasm for the show.
We couldn't do it without you.
And of course, a huge thank you to the incredible team over at AudioCast Lab India for making this podcast possible. They're the ones behind the scenes, ensuring everything runs smoothly so we can bring these conversations to all of your ears.
They are the best in the business.
So if any of you out there listening have a podcast idea brewing, be sure to reach out to Audiocast Lab India. They'll help you bring that vision to life.
Absolutely.
And now, as we prepare to set sail on our next adventure, exploring trade and commerce, India's global footprint, we invite you to join us once again as we uncover the economic brilliance of ancient India. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those economic wheels turning.